Today is the day. Tennessee football takes on SEC Media Days. Josh Heupel, Hendon Hooker, Cedric Tillman, and Trayvon Flowers will hit Radio Row and the main podium down in Atlanta. What's everybody saying about Tennessee? We'll get you ready for Tennessee's day here in Atlanta, right here on Locked On Vols.
You are Locked On Vols, your daily podcast on the Tennessee Volunteers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey everybody, what is going on? It is your host here at Locked On Vols, Eric Kane. Welcome into it. Live from Radio Row. Always say live. This is a podcast, so recording it live, obviously. But down here at Radio Row, SEC Media Days 2022. And today it is Tennessee Day here for the wrapping up, really, SEC Media Days. Been here all week long, and finally Tennessee's going to be coming up. So Josh Heupel, Cedric Tillman, Hendon Hooker, Trayvon Flowers going to take to the podium. Looking forward to that. I've got a couple of interviews to get you set up and ready to roll. We got Chris Gordy, our guy from Locked On SEC and Sports 790 in Houston. He's going to stop by and give his thoughts on Tennessee. And in segment 3, we will chat with Mike Griffith. Georgia was one of the 4 teams that went to the podium on Wednesday and got his perspective on the Bulldogs, the reigning national champions, and, of course, his thoughts on Tennessee as well. Thanks so much for making Locked On Vols your first listen, your first watch each and every day on YouTube. Please subscribe. The push to 3,000 before football season. This sucker is going to explode in the fall, and it's all thanks to you guys, _Canner and Locked On Vols. Appreciate you so much. Let's get into some of those highlights from Wednesday here at SEC Media Days. So on Wednesday, it was Arkansas, it was Georgia, it was Florida, and it was Kentucky. Those were the 4 teams that were represented here. And the great thing about on Wednesday was, unlike on Tuesday when Mississippi State was present, there was no Will Levis. When South Carolina was present and there was no Spencer Rattler, we got all 4 quarterbacks. And don't get me wrong, all 4 of these guys are your quarterbacks. They are, without a doubt, the quarterbacks. There's no quarterback competition whatsoever, and so it's easy to bring them. But, I mean, like, same with Will Rogers. Like, nobody's playing quarterback but Will Rogers in Starkville, right? But that's a conversation for another day. So it was good to hear from some quarterbacks and good to hear from some of these head coaches. A couple of notes that I took, nothing major. You know, the highlights of Kirby Smart. You know, he in talking about coming back after winning a national championship, he says it's not, you know, complacency is not the concern. Experience is. Keep in mind, 10 starters go on to the NFL draft, 5 of which were first-round NFL draft picks. A lot of guys left that was a generational type defense, and some of those players on offense as well. And you got to replace those guys. But the way Kirby Smart has recruited the last 4 to 5 cycles is preparing him for this moment. It is truly a reset. It's a reload, not a rebuild. And I've said that a lot about Kirby Smart and Georgia as well. You know, it's more conditioning, not as much in pads, more conditioning, things that he learned during his national title run last year. Didn't go full pads an awful lot in practice, had a lot more conditioning. And a conversation I had with David Cutcliffe, who we're going to play on the show probably next week. And, guys, that was a fantastic interview. I promise you, you are not going to want to miss that next week when I run it. But even David Cutcliffe said, you know, the more conditioned you are, the better decisions you make. And that's something that Kirby Smart said at the podium that he learned during the run last night. Kirby on Stetson Bennett saying he is the least respected great player in the country. And honestly, it's getting harder and harder to go against that notion. Stetson Bennett always done is won a national championship, come in, won the starting job, and prove everybody like me wrong. We talk about it consistently, but as we'll go over with the quarterback position in the SEC, and as we talked about already on this podcast, guys, he's number 6, maybe number 7 in terms of talented quarterbacks. Like if I'm listing off quarterbacks in the SEC, you know, Hendon Hooker, Bryce Young, Will Levis, Spencer Rattler, you know, you got all these guys, KJ Jefferson. You have all these guys, and it's a while down there before I get to Stetson Bennett. So that's just kind of hilarious to me. But Kirby Smart said he's the least respected great player in the country. It's kind of hard to argue. He goes on to say on Stetson Bennett, people keep doubting him, and he keeps proving them wrong. Well, that's true, and I'm pointing to myself as well because I continue to doubt him. Kirby Smart says 95 players are on name, image, and likeness deal for Georgia. 95 players are on name, image, and likeness deals for Georgia. But just like pretty much every other coach that's taken to the podium, been asked about name, image, and likeness, Kirby Smart says inducement's wrong. and he's curious to see exactly what's going to happen with this as we get further along. Mark Stoops, a couple of highlights from him. Napier was fine, nothing really out of the ordinary. Sam Pittman was fine. He did get asked. He did get a go Hogs, and he did get a thank you for being 16-6 at Arkansas against the spread. So there's that. If you haven't seen that tweet out there, I'll retweet it from the show account. It was a little ridiculous. But a couple of notes on Mark Stoops on name, image, likeness. He said so much good with NIL, but it's an issue in our game today. He said the concern is with pay for play. It's something that he's interested to see the sustainability of that over time and for the future of the game. He said, what's legal? The line is very much blurred in terms of what's legal and what's inducement in terms of name, image, and likeness. And I think that's something we're all continuing to learn and continue to work through. And I think there'll be a bigger picture that's kind of out there as time goes on. So nonetheless, I thought Mark Stoops was really, really good. You had Will Levis, who was really fantastic as well. I was impressed whenever he had that breakout session on name, image, likeness. He recognized that, hey, I'm a quarterback. I'm going to have more opportunities than the majority of my teammates. So I'm trying to use NIL for a good thing. So I like to golf. I went to a local golf course and I wanted to play some free golf. And so we got that hooked up. But then I went around the team and said, hey, who all likes to golf on my team? Every Wednesday night, let's go play golf together. And that's what they do. Will Levis noted that that he had to miss it last night because obviously he was at SEC Media Days. But that's the difference he's making in trying to do his part and not creating stress, breaking up a locker room, because there will be some guys who make a whole lot more money compared to some guys who make no money in terms of name, image, and likeness. That is something that really stood out to me from Kentucky's quarterback, Will Levis. So a couple of those highlights from day number 3. 3 days officially done. Today, coming up here at SEC Media Days, you will have Texas A&M, you will have Tennessee, and you will have Auburn. Jimbo Fisher, he's made some offseason headlines. Brian Harsin, anybody surprised he's still here, right? You thought he was going to be a goner there back in December or January. And then Josh Heupel. Tennessee will be sandwiched right in the middle of those two teams. And we've been previewing it. We'll have audio. We'll have some video. We'll have some more interviews coming up, all that to break down Tennessee at SEC Media Days. Guys, I'm telling you right now, the buzz around Radio Row, or the question from every table to station to station, has been more or less, who is the third best team in the Southeastern Conference? There are a number of teams you could put in there. Is it Arkansas? Is it Texas A&M? Is it Tennessee? Is it Kentucky? Is it Florida? Hell, you're getting some. Is it South Carolina? You could make an argument, a strong argument for a couple of those teams, but you can make an argument really for just about any of those teams. Lance, you can make an argument for any of those teams. Good. Lance is over here sitting down. You remember him from the show yesterday. A lot of you guys are big fans of him. You can make an argument for any of those teams. And so it's interesting. And I think as time goes on, obviously that'll be answered as we get into fall camp and as we get into the season. But a lot of people making the case for Tennessee, guys. So it's interesting. I'm intrigued. I think the media turnout will be a very good one for Hendon Hooker and Cedric Tillman. I mean, at the end of the day, you're talking about two of the most popular and productive players returning in the Southeastern Conference. I mean, we had Bryce Young and we had Will Anderson Jr. here the other day. I recognize that, but Cedric Tillman, Hendon Hooker, not a bad duo. They're going to be here later on the day. So Tennessee, a little bit of a buzzword here around Radio Row. And we'll certainly get into those conversations with Chris Gordy and Mike Griffith. My two hosts to carry us through segments 2 and 3. And then, guys, don't forget, we'll wrap it all up tomorrow. So we'll get Gordy here in just one moment. He is a Locked On SEC host and sports talk host over at Sports 90 and Houston Texans. Before we get to Chris, guys, from the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bars before, but guess what? Your friends over at Built have given you coconut brownie chunk, the Puffs treatment, okay? That's right, the coconut brownie chunk Built Bar flavor that you love, and delicious chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud with coconut brownie goodness. Yes, you heard that right, coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling for just a second and listen to me, all right? They are good for you. Low calorie, low sugar, high in protein, and so delicious. Did I mention it's covered in 100% real chocolate? But it's good for you. It's a tasty treat, and they have pretty much whatever combination you can possibly think of at Built.com. But you need to go and try out the coconut brownie chunk bar puff. Let me try that again. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, the puff version. Need to check all that out at built.com. Go to built.com right now. Put log15 for 15% off your next order. That's log15 for 15% off. That's all at built.com. Chris Gordy, Sports Talk 790 in Houston, also the host of Locked On SEC, Day 3, beginning here of SEC Media Days. Big takeaways so far. Monday and Tuesday, we're halfway home, and Alabama Day is in the rearview mirror now in real time. Sam Pittman's taking the podium. Going to have quarterbacks here on a Wednesday, and then, of course, the Tennessee Volunteers coming up on Thursday.
Yeah, I think the overwhelming topic of discussion is, I think most people can collectively agree Alabama and Georgia are the premier teams in this conference. Obviously, both play for a national championship, both bring a lot back. And so I think the overwhelming theme is who's number 3. And what's so funny is I've talked to so many people this week that have given so many different answers. Is it Tennessee? Is it A&M? Is it Arkansas? I mean, it's collectively been so many different viewpoints, and I think they're all right. You can't argue with them because everyone's got a case. I've talked for weeks about how strong I think the quarterback crop is this year in the SEC, and who do you like more? Do you like Hendon Hooker in year one of Josh Heupel's offense settling in? Probably going to get even better this year, take his game to the next level. Will Levis at Kentucky, same thing. KJ Jefferson, everybody's high on him at Arkansas. They think he'll take the next leap. So it really is, which team do you believe in? And then the schedule plays part of it too. Will Rogers, I think, has all the talent in the world at Mississippi State, but they have a brutal schedule. So I think schedule plays a part in it. But that's kind of been, to me, the big topic outside of NIL and conference realignment and who's the SEC going to add and all this other stuff. To me, it's, who's the third best team and who can compete with Georgia in the East and Bama in the West and potentially, win their side of the conference.
You mentioned making your case for the third best team in the SEC, and if you're making the case for Tennessee, you mentioned Josh Heupel in that offense, you're number 2. You mentioned Hendon Hooker. What about those two specifics, and maybe some other things you would say, would make the case for Tennessee to be that number 3 team? And then on the other side of the spectrum, why would Tennessee not be the third best team? What's holding Tennessee back right now?
Yeah, and this is what's interesting about preseason rankings and all this. Everybody does it differently. When you do a preseason ranking, is it based on where that team was last year, where they stand right now going into the season, or are you trying to predict? And a lot of people try to predict, I think I like Tennessee, but their schedule's brutal. They got to go to Georgia. They got to go to South Carolina, to LSU, all these tough road trips.
Host Alabama.
Yeah, and all these people predict, you try to predict. I don't think you should do that. A preseason ranking is a preseason ranking. This is where this team is right now. Right now, Tennessee is in a great spot. I've got questions about the defense, sure. But I love the offense. I love Hendon Hooker. I think Cedric Tillman's going to leave DBs in the dust in the SEC. So, it's all about where they are right now. But, I caught up with Hendon Hooker a few weeks ago at the Manning Passing Academy. And just so mature, really smart kid. Who knows his limitations but knows his ability, believes in himself. And he's not cocky, but he really does believe that he can get even better. And we know how good the numbers were last year, but I'm excited to see it, man. I'm excited to and so happy for the Vols fan base with how the lowest of lows, just 2, 3, 4 years ago, to be here where we're literally talking about them having an outside chance to compete and win the SEC East, I think is awesome. Are we getting ahead of ourselves? Maybe. It's the defense still is going to have its limitations this year, but I think it's awesome that that the Vols are back. And for anybody who didn't like the Heupel hire to begin with, man, I would encourage you to start coming around on him.
Kind of an angle I've been taking this week down here and speaking with defenders around the conference, specifically the ones who played Tennessee last year and who will likely play Tennessee again, so these SEC East and Alabama defenders, about the pace of play. I mean, everybody knows that Josh Heupel's offense is trying to be the fastest in the country. It was fast last year, and he wants to be even faster. I think they were running like 3 plays in the span of a minute, a minute 4 or something. It's something ridiculous like that. Regardless, interesting comment from Zach Pickens yesterday of South Carolina saying, hey, we lost that game in quarter number 1. They scored 28 points and we couldn't breathe. But after that, we settled in and we played good football, but it was too late. Do you think defenses are going to adjust and stop that offense a little bit? Because the second quarter for Tennessee last year offensively was never good. The teams kind of adjusted a little bit, but then ultimately they came back out in the third quarter and put it on again. Do you see defenses and teams adjusting to that offense year two in the SEC?
Yes, but I'll say this: they got to run the ball better. Whether it's Jabari Small, Jalen Wright, Whitehead, I don't know, whoever it is, they've got to be more consistent running the football. When Tennessee's at its best, they have a featured back or two guys, and they move the chains and they put together some long methodical drives. Look, you can do that. You can have the high flying, passing everywhere offense early on, but where things bog down in the middle of the game and the other team starts to close the gap, that's where a good running back comes in handy, and you move the chains and you eat up clock and you protect that lead. That's what I think Tennessee needs to get back to. And most people I've talked to is you've had good backs and then they hit the transfer portal and they're unhappy and all this kind of stuff. So I think Tennessee just needs to figure out who that guy is this year. And I like Small. I think he can carry the rock a good bit this year, but they've got to find that consistency to play ball control. It's one thing to go get that big lead, but man, you got to protect it and eat up clock. And if you're punt, 3 and out, other teams are going to come back on you.
Yeah, it's interesting. Jabari Small is a good player, but durability is an issue there. Tennessee actually averaged over 200 yards rushing a game, but in those big games against Georgia, against Alabama, didn't show up. And then something Tennessee needs to expand on is short yardage situations. I mean, the Purdue Music City Bowl, it's a meme that'll live in infamy, right? Getting kept out there. Go get that 1 yard. And so I would agree with you there about running the football. Defensively, you cover the SEC. You talk about all these teams for Locked On SEC and Sports Talk 790 in Houston, Texas. Jeremy Banks, Byron Young, Tyler Barron. Nice little trio in the front seven. Tyler Barron needs to play more. He needs to be more consistent. But how good can those three be? And do you see any all-conference type players? I think Jeremy Banks can be an all-conference player. He's just a tackle machine. And Byron Young could be a day 2 draft pick potentially.
Yeah, I like their defensive front. Banks obviously, with the 5.5 sacks last year, and Young, same thing. I think it's all about consistency, and that's what's so interesting. Interviewing a lot of these guys this week at SEC Media Days and talking with some of the pass rushers. It's interesting to see, where are their stats coming? Are they coming against the Central Michigans and the Troys and those kind of games, or are they coming in the big SEC games? And so that's, to me, the big premier SEC games. That's where you earn your money, and that's where you got to get after it and get the big sacks and make the big plays. I think back to the shootout with Kentucky last year. Who's going to step up? Who makes a big play? I think was it Alante Taylor with the pick six, whoever it was. Game-changing plays. Who's going to make the game-changing plays in the big SEC games? So, but it starts up front. It starts with the pass rush and. Good group of freshmen coming in too that I think will be interesting to see how they work them into the mix as well. Jenkins and Phillips and West and those guys. But no, I think this is a good crop. I think this is a good group of defensive linemen at Tennessee. And yeah, man, if they could be somewhere, if they could be top 4 in sacks in the SEC, I think this defense is going to be just fine because you can shield your problems in the secondary. Because if you're getting after the quarterback, even if you're not getting the sack and just force them to get rid of the ball early, I think it could be serviceable. I think that's, if you're a realistic Vol fan, you just say, look, if our defense can be overall middle of the pack in total stats, I think we'll be all right.
Tackles for loss was not an issue, one of the nation's leaders last season, but you're right, sacks, getting after the passer more consistently will be a challenge for Tennessee. Last thing, Chris, 2 rapid fires to end this interview. Who will be that third team, not only in the SEC, well, I guess the second team in the SEC East, who's the third team overall? Who are you going to pick? And then lastly, who's a breakout player that we need to be looking out for, not just for Tennessee, but conference-wide? Who's somebody that we think might have a Cedric Tillman-like step-up or a Hendon Hooker-like step-up this season?
Yeah, as far as the third best team, I'm a little biased. My wife went to Kentucky, but I still make fun of her and, talk trash about Kentucky and put them down all the time in our house. But I think realistically, the way their schedule sets up, right out of the gates, week 2, they're in the swamp. And that's just been a place historically that they have struggled. If they can get that win, I think they have a chance to run the table.
But haven't they won down there 2 of the last maybe five times?
Yeah, they've played much more competitive.
But historically.
But I'm just saying, like, that's one that, like, get through that early test. And then I think they have a chance to run off a bunch of wins. And then we go into Halloween weekend, go into Knoxville, a place where they do not play well, historically have not played well. I think that will be a big, big game. And if they can win that one, maybe they only lose one game the rest of the way to Georgia. And then maybe we're talking about Kentucky as a team that is going to a New Year's Six Bowl, like Ole Miss last year, going to the Sugar Bowl. I could see Kentucky doing that. But again, it's going to be hostile environment, but I like Will Levis. I think he's really good. And, that is going to be a heck of a part 2 showdown between Kentucky and Tennessee if they get there. Look, if Kentucky comes in that game with a couple losses, it's still going to be a fun game. But, if I had to pick one right now, I would say I would pick Kentucky to finish 3rd, in the SEC overall. But look, I can make a case for Tennessee. I can make a case for Arkansas. I can even make a case for Ole Miss if all these transfer portal guys hit. And then an underrated guy, a guy who I think is going to have a breakout year, B.J. Ojulari at LSU.
I agree.
He's Azeez Ojulari's younger brother. He was an underrated pass rusher last year, got after the quarterback. I think he's a guy who's primed for a double-digit sack year at LSU. LSU's strength is their front 7. They got some weaknesses in that secondary, but I think up front they're really strong. And that's another game that's going to be a lot of fun when Tennessee comes to Baton Rouge. It's been a while since they've been there. A little controversial ending. Derek Dooley at the helm several years back. But yeah, that's going to be a fun one. But I like Ojulari. I think he's going to have a monster year in the SEC.
That's former Tennessee football commit B.J. Ojulari for those that keep up with recruiting. All right, his name is Chris Gordy, host of Sports Talk 790. Hey, that's the flagship station for the Houston Astros where Drew Gilbert is destined. So you can follow some of his work there. And, of course, Chris, online, Locked On SEC, pretty much wherever you get your podcast, you're covering the SEC every single day.
Yeah, and we've had some great interviews all week long, hoping to get a couple of the Vols. If you missed it, we had a great interview with Hendon Hooker at the Manning Passing Academy. It's up on our YouTube page. So, yeah, check us out, Locked On SEC.
Great stuff there from our guy, Chris Gordy. I've been telling you guys, what a day to be subscribed to his podcast. He's gotten some awesome interviews from around the SEC, Locked On SEC host and Sports 790 in Houston, Texas. Great stuff there from Chris Gordy. We're going to wrap up a Thursday show by checking in with Mike Griffith. He is Georgia beat writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, DogNation.com, and he's covered pretty much every team in the Southeastern Conference. Spent a lot of time in Knoxville, guys. You know the name. And as far as an insider for Georgia, he's one of the best. So we're going to bring him on, and he will talk a lot of Tennessee, how Tennessee stacks up against Georgia, that and a whole lot more as Tennessee, again, making their way to Atlanta, making their way to the podium, and we'll have complete reaction and takeaways on tomorrow's show from Tennessee at SEC Media Days. But to wrap up a Thursday show, we'll get to Mike Griffith here in just a second. Mike Griffith, DogNation.com, the AJC, covering the Georgia Bulldogs. It is Georgia Day here in Atlanta, Georgia. Mike, how you doing?
Doing great, man.
Well, first, right off the top, trying to repeat, obviously, you get that national championship. What's the offseason been like covering the Georgia Bulldogs?
Well, I don't think this offseason's been the same for anyone just because of everything happening in college football. You remember last year about this time we learned that Texas and Oklahoma would be joining the SEC in 2025, if maybe sooner, probably, we'll find out later on that. But things haven't really settled down. Most recently we've heard about USC and UCLA and how does the SEC respond to that as far as the conference, expansion potential, going to spring meetings in Destin. I know Jimmy Himes was there. He talked to a lot of people. You probably know all this, but, are we going to see a 9-game schedule? Is it going to still stay 8 games but be a 7+1 model? So, and Georgia being on top, all these things are relevant, right? When you win championships, everything that happens in the league affects you. Particularly NIL, right? We're only 1 year into NIL and one-time transfer, and Georgia lost 13 players in the transfer portal. 4 of them were former starters. Didn't add anyone. Went after Caleb Williams, struck out. Stetson Bennett comes back as their starter. So, for Georgia, it's life on top. Can you maintain? You heard Nick Saban say yesterday, success isn't a continuum. Success is temporary. I've been down this road before with the 98 Vols. I remember, oh my gosh, so many guys coming back, and we just knew Tennessee would go back-to-back, right? Because all you lost was Al Wilson. But you lose a catalyst like that, and suddenly it's not the same team. There's not the same level of accountability. Teams approach you differently. And that Vols team got upset at Arkansas. And when they played their bowl game, it wasn't the same because they weren't playing for a championship when they faced Nebraska. A lot of troubles come with being the national championship program. Everybody aims for you, and Georgia's dealing with that now. So, I think Tennessee fans can reflect on that era and know what it was like. Heck, they're back now. I mean, I've been asked a dozen times who's the number 3 team. Tennessee comes out of my mouth at every point. I mean,
I had that conversation this morning doing a hit in Houston saying who's the number 3 team, and I'm like, well, I've heard Tennessee, I've heard Arkansas, I've heard Kentucky, but it always starts at Tennessee maybe.
Well, you can make the case for a lot of teams, but, I think what Josh Heupel's done with that offense and just showing you that ceiling, I mean, Tennessee's going tit for tat with Bama through 3 quarters last year. I mean, that's a ball game. Mm-hmm. And if Hendon plays a little bit better against Georgia, there's some throws that, and you say, he's not that far off. And I had a chance to visit with Josh. He was a co-winner of the Steve Spurrier Award that I do with Doring, and he was down there, and I had a chance to visit. And I feel like Heupel has a grasp of what Tennessee football is all about. He fits really well, and we've seen that fan base really get behind the Vols. And NIL, I mean, this is a big-time game. I mean, Billy Napier at Florida is writing love notes to his fan base, begging for money. Yep. And here's Tennessee on the verge of, another $230 million going into Neyland Stadium or something. I was up there on campus for a baseball game, the rock and roll, Tony V. Vols and that baseball program. And, I'm seeing these, parking structures going Tennessee's there with facilities. The groundwork has been laid. You've got the coach. You've got the quarterback. So, I think Tennessee has the ceiling to be that choice for the number 3 team going into the year. But you got to win games. You got to get breaks. You got to get momentum.
Something Kirby just mentioned when he was on the main podium, and you touched on it a little bit, it's a complacency is not the issue right now. It's experience. And, of course, Georgia lost a lot on that defense and everything. But, I mean, the way Kirby's been recruiting the last 3-4 cycles – it's almost like plug and play. There is still so much talent on that team. But for a team like Tennessee, to have more sustained success against Georgia past the first quarter, kind of what needs to happen for – I mean, obviously you mentioned Hendon needs to be a little bit more accurate. He was high that game. I remember. Sure. He kept missing high. For Tennessee to take a step, what needs to happen against Georgia in that pivotal SEC East matchup?
Well, for one, it's Josh Heupel is still building his culture. The great news, the best news for Tennessee is, and this sounds so boring and fans are going, we're talking football, Mike. Yes, but your administration is absolutely pivotal. Yep. And you've got a president and you've got a chancellor. You've got leadership now that you haven't had since the 1990s at the top of that university. And everything trickles down from there. Your AD, he's expensive. He's worth it. All right? So you have the leadership that you need that enables Josh Heupel to do his job properly with the things that he needs. So step one is it's already in place. Tennessee has the facilities. They have the leadership. You have the coach. Now you're getting the players through NIL. Now you're building a culture, and you have to handle success. And this is where the catalyst part comes in. You go out and recruit the right kind of kid, and you hope that a guy like an Al Wilson emerges, or a Casey Clausen or a Kevin Simon, or these character guys that Tennessee's greatest teams have had that make the difference in those close games. Mm-hmm. Because if we look back at some of the closest games and most important games from year to year, I remember Gene Stallings told me this when I covered the Tide, or before Tennessee. He said, there'd be 4 or 5 plays in a game that would really make the difference, that would really change them. I could say that about the national championship game with Georgia, certainly. And I would say that about Tennessee football as well. No. You got to have the right guys in the right places to make those 4 or 5 plays. And so culture is one within the team, players being accountable to one another. I know that sounds boring, but it's very true. And 2, you got to have that catalyst. It's not just football, it's basketball too. Mm-hmm. I mean, hey, everybody remember Chris Lofton? I mean, you want to talk about catalyst. You want to talk about guys that can light the fire. I mean, Grant Williams. I mean, Tennessee's had these figures at Jordan Beck in sports over the years that make who's going to be that guy. It can't just be Hendon Hooker and throwing the ball around the park. You've got to find a defensive catalyst, I believe, that if nothing else puts a little stinger back into that Orange defense.
Yeah, could that be Jeremy Banks, who's a tackle machine? Could that be Byron Young being a little bit more consistent out there on the edge? feel like we've been waiting for Tyler Barron for years. He just needs to be on the field more. Those are the three I look to in the front seven to kind of get that started.
You mentioned Jeremy Banks. When he signed, I actually went to his home
in
outside of Memphis.
Cordova. Yeah.
And I sat down with Jeremy and let's go to a mall and do it. So we rode around. We couldn't find a spot at the mall, so we ended up going to like his stepdad's. It was really
always awkward in recruiting. Yeah, because I've done it.
But you know what? Jeremy was awesome, right?
Yeah.
And then he had the off the field incident and everything. He's kind of like the rough cut version of Stetson Bennett, right?
No.
You want to talk about an underdog story and a guy that's kind of been there and back. Mm-hmm. So personally, I'm rooting for Jeremy as a person.
Yeah.
The kid I sat down with was obviously prior to some of the things that happened at which happens to a lot of young people. Mm-hmm. Which happens to coaches. I mean, Scott Cochran's reinstated at Georgia after a year off and 1 year sober, whatever he put out on Twitter. So this is real life stuff, but I'm rooting for a guy like Jeremy Banks to maybe be that guy, to be that catalyst, that guy that can spark that defense, to have a little bit more of a stinger to play.
And he can get even better because he's still learning how to play.
Fantastic. He's a great running back, too. Fantastic athlete. But you know that Josh Heupel knows what it takes. In fact, Josh, he won the First-Year Coach of the Year award for his first-year team. He actually had won it before. He's the first coach to ever win that award twice. He was a first-year Coach of the Year when he was at Central Florida, too. So you've got a lot of great stuff in store there at Knoxville right now.
All right, last thing, man. This is kind of the football terms in terms of the question we're throwing out there. Let's look at that SEC. Let's keep it to the SEC East. I'm not crazy. You're not crazy. I would say you're probably going to pick Georgia to win the East. I'm going to pick Georgia to win the East. But then it really does. Is it going to be Tennessee? Is it going to be Kentucky? South Carolina's had a really nice offseason. Florida, I think Billy Napier's going to do some things that's not going to take them long. How do you see the rest of that Eastern Division kind of shaping up, and what needs to happen for maybe that pecking order of Tennessee finishing in second or Kentucky finishing in second?
Well, let's just start out and put Missouri and Vanderbilt in the bottom in the garbage can, because Missouri struck out on JT Daniels. If they would have landed him, they would have been had a chance to contend. They didn't. Vanderbilt's awful, and it's just period. They don't try. They don't put money in. I get mad just thinking about the potential that's in Nashville and the way they let those student athletes down with their terrible facilities. So we'll knock them out. The other four teams on any given Saturday, anything can happen. Now, Georgia is a prohibitive favorite. The talent is incredible. Yeah. They bring back Stetson Bennett. Kirby Smart is a great coach. They're trying to build a dynasty there. That said, they're not playing first-time quarterbacks this year. All right, last year there was a lot of first-year quarterbacks that Georgia faced. Mm-hmm. Second time around for Hendon Hooker. Second time around for Will Levis. Second time around for Anthony Richardson. He actually started against Georgia. Yeah. Spencer Rattler, maybe first time at South Carolina, but this is a veteran from Oklahoma. Dogs got to go their third game of the year and play in Columbia. So I wonder what's the weather going to be like in Lexington when Georgia travels there in November. Yeah. Could that game once again determine the SEC East as it did a few years ago? Could Will Rogers and Mississippi State pull an upset the week before? Is that a trap game? You start out with Oregon. You play your former defensive coordinator, knows your roster like the back. Does everybody else get the playbook from the Ducks? Does Bo Nix perform some magic? Again, another veteran quarterback. Georgia didn't face a lot of veteran quarterbacks last year. This year they will. And, oh, by the way, Georgia had 15 guys drafted in the NFL, including 5 first-round draft picks. So this is a Georgia team that needs to get some momentum. I do think that they win the East by default, but I've got them losing the game. I don't know who it's going to be. Could it be Tennessee? Could it be Kentucky, Mississippi State, Oregon? I don't know. But I think the Dogs are going to get tripped up on a Saturday this regular season.
Great stuff, Mike Griffith. Where can we follow your work? What do you got coming out? Probably tons and tons of weeks on weeks of coverage here from SEC Media Days.
Yeah, right, man. So Vols don't go till tomorrow, so I can't write about Big Orange till Thursday. But obviously Stetson Bennett stuff today. Yeah. Some insight into who and what he is. A lot of people can't really – he doesn't really fit in the box. It's like, nah, this is a great Walt Disney – no, it's really not the Walt Disney story you think it is, okay? He left the program. He went JOCO. He came back. Nobody else in the league wanted him. And then he threatened to leave the program after winning the national championship game. Not exactly the warm and fuzzies. And yet, he's still an underdog, a very special story. He's got an incredible place in history, and I know the Dog fans love him. So I'm going to write more about Stetson today. What he's done is remarkable. What Kirby's done is remarkable. But you know what? We're all talking Bama again. And can anybody beat Alabama? And doggone, if Tennessee didn't have to play Bama from the West every year, what would our narrative be right now? I mean, I'd be real. I would love to do a talk show, or love to hear John and Jimmy, or yourself, Eric, or Josh or Swain talking about what do Vols fans think about the schedule model. If I was at Tennessee, man, I'd be pounding that schedule model story every week because I'd be thinking, finally, this is a chance to be an equalizer, and Tennessee can get out from having to play.
Here's the thing, eight games season conference schedule, be Vanderbilt. 9-game, you get Bama in there. Because if you go with the 1-7, it'd be Vanderbilt. The 3-6, you'd still have to play Alabama.
I love tradition, but I love championship football even more.
Yeah, exactly. Mike, thanks so much, man.
Right. Appreciate it.
Great stuff there from Mike Griffith again. Mike Griffith, Atlanta Journal-Constitution, DogNation.com, talking a lot of Tennessee Vols, and he knows Tennessee very, very well. Used to cover the team, spent a whole lot of time in Knoxville, and, of course, covers a national championship winning team now with the Georgia Bulldogs. Hey, that's going to do it here for a Thursday edition of the show. You're not going to want to miss tomorrow's show, guys. We're going to wrap up SEC Media Days. Going to be talking all things Tennessee, what you missed, who said what. We'll hear from them. We'll see them. We'll get some interviews, all that and more coming up as we react to Tennessee at SEC Media Days. We'll hear what Hendon Hooker, Trayvon Flowers, and Cedric Tillman, along with Josh Heupel, all have to say from SEC Football Media Days in Atlanta, Georgia. Guys, appreciate it. Thank you so much. And go ahead, like, subscribe, follow on all your platforms, especially on YouTube, guys. And if you're watching on YouTube, give me a thumbs up. Give me a little like there. Go to Locked On Kentucky. Give Lance some love as well. Appreciate that as we continue to grow the shows. We want this thing to explode in football season, and we are well on our way. Guys, thank you so much. Big show coming up tomorrow on a Friday. Until then, enjoy the rest of your Thursday, everybody.